Maziyar GHIABI is an Iran expert and professor at the University of Exeter. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us, to give us a bit more analysis about what's going on in Iran at the moment. And first of all, just give us some context. How bad is this cost of living situation for Iranians at the moment?
Hi, good to be with you. Well, the cost of living situation is absolutely out of control. We are talking about inflation that changes hourly rather than daily, and the prices of basic commodities, milk, sugar, cooking oil, goes up day by day by 50% or more. So it's absolutely beyond the means of the general population to sustain such conditions, and that's the ground upon which these protests have expanded and really become something quite serious now. But of course, there is also other aspects to it.
Well, what are those other aspects? I mean, have the protesters' demands evolved just from those cost of living concerns?
Yeah, of course, this is along a long trajectory of protests that have happened over the past decade, particularly 3 years ago, and before that, a number of smaller kind of protests. And of course, there is a level of economic dissatisfaction among the Iranian population, but also questions of social, cultural rights. And Iran being a country that is very complex, you have minority rights groups, ethnic groups that are also part of this because of discrimination. You have questions of gender discrimination, of course, which were also part of the women life freedom movement. Then you have a long-standing questions about the place of religion within Iranian society and politics that also has built up over the years. So you have a multi-layered convergence, really, of dissatisfaction that is now building up. And that's what we are seeing now.
Now, the Iranian president does seem to be trying at least to strike a conciliatory tone, ordering security forces, for example, not to crack down on the protests, trying to draw a distinction between peaceful demonstrators and what he calls armed rioters. Is that going to be enough to calm tensions?
I doubt it, because it's been built up over different layers of mediation that so far has always failed. And eventually what has happened is that these protests, at least in the past, for instance, 3 years ago, faded away after a month or so by heavy clampdown. The president himself has very limited power in mediating because the problems are beyond his reach, or his government's reach. This is something that's being in part imposed by foreign sanctions that prevent Iran from having a functioning economy and exporting its major commodities, oil in particular, but also accessing the international market of financial resources and means of support. It's likely to happen, in my view, of course, predictions always fail to some extent, is that this will last for a few weeks, and then eventually, with a heavy-handed approach, this will be contained. But the situation is now different at an international level, and that's really the enigma point. We don't know how the international circumstances that have changed following also Donald Trump's intervention in Venezuela could affect the current wave of protests.
Well, let's talk more about that. Donald Trump has threatened the Iranian authorities against killing peaceful protesters. He's threatened, saying the U.S. would intervene. Do you actually see that happening?
Donald Trump is notoriously unpredictable, but we can see a sort of a recurrent kind of modality in which he uses certain excuses: drug trafficking in Venezuela, Iranian protesters' lives in the current situation, to then advance certain U.S. Foreign policy priorities. So I wouldn't be surprised if the U.S. and particularly the U.S. allies in Israel will use the current wave of destabilization to undermine further the Islamic Republic. That's very likely, and probably is already happening beyond our knowledge, of course.
What do you see for the future of the current regime? Does Donald Trump want to change it? Could these protests eventually topple it?
Well, the current format in which politics is exercised in the Islamic Republic is not sustainable. That's clear to us as Iran experts and scholars, to the Iranian people, and even to those in government. They know that the current way of working of Iranian politics is unsustainable, both vis-a-vis the international community. Iran is isolated economically, cannot sustain this current system, but also vis-a-vis the internal dissatisfaction among people. But what kind of solution can be found within the sort of Islamic Republic's way of dealing with dissent, that's very hard to say. I mean, a radical change is very much needed in the way people participate in politics. Is the current leadership keen to allow that? To what extent this will bring change? Experience says that they haven't been really open to radical shifts in state-society relations. So eventually there will be a breaking point.
Maziyar, thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us. That's Maziyar GHIABI, an Iran expert and professor at the University of Exeter. Thank you.